Hello and welcome to the In the Money Players Podcast. This is our show for Monday, August 11th, looking back at weekend action from Del Mar and Saratoga and our friends over at Colonial Downs. Peter Thomas Fornatel, far from the Brooklyn bunker, down here in West Virginia at the Capon Springs Resort, a place that I try to get to at least once a year. Susan's family, they've been coming here since her dad, who is nigh on a nonagenarian, has come basically every summer of his life. So it's a bit of a family reunion vibe. We actually even have a Van Meter bandstand here. Going to check out some live music tonight. Very fun family stuff. Of course, I do spend a insignificant amount of time holed up betting horses and talking about horses. I know I'm not the only one to do this. I'm not going to out our regular listener / viewer who is a fellow compatriot of Capon Springs, but you know who you are. You know who you are. We bring in to chat with me a man who you know from his fantastic work in various places, twinspires.com, one of our proud sponsors. Make sure to check out their tournaments platform. It's doing great things over there. You also know him from inthemoneypodcast.com, where he regularly writes about NYRA. And I had several people this weekend tell me that they'd made some good money off of his picks recently. Let's ask him if he's done the same. He's Nick Tammaro. Nick, how's it been going?
Doing great, Pete. Had a good weekend at Colonial Downs and back in the mix now at home. So ready to get after this second half, almost the whole second half of the Saratoga meet. Just 16 days left?
Yeah, 24 down, 16 to go, I think is the math on that.
Yeah, 60% in. So it'll be a furious finish.
It should be good. I want to ask you about your experience at Colonial Downs. But first, while we're talking Saratoga, I do want to mention that the New York bred sale is going on right now. Very excited to see how that turns out, hearing great things, talking back and forth, the great communication you get as a member of the Adelphi Racing Club. This isn't even an official plug for them, but I'll put it in just because I'm so impressed with the work Matt Couture does, sort of letting you know which horses they're targeting, which first-year stallions are impressing. So many good things that it just speaks to the depth and breadth of the New York bred program that so many sharp people, the list goes on, of the top owners you're going to see looking out there at the New York bred sale. How much do you pay attention to the game, Nick, at the New York bred, at the sale level in general? How much do you follow the industry, and how much are you only interested when you can bet on them?
I'll go through the catalogs for the big sales, and I did find myself probably watching more 2-year-old in training works this year for OBS, just because you're likelier to see some of those 2-year-olds come back somewhat quickly and race. The yearlings, they're a long way off. But yeah, I'll usually look through the catalogs, maybe document some fun pedigrees, some mares that I remember, dams that I remembered, and horses like that. So it's always interesting to look at some of the pages for the first-year stallions, see a little bit about them. And with the New York breds, I took a look last week to see how many Buceros were in there and who some of the other stallions are that are represented now, first crops especially, because it's always fun to see some of the offspring after we enjoyed those original horses on the racetrack.
Yeah, Bucero had a couple of very interesting ones in the New York bred sale. We're going to recap that sale a little bit later in the week. Maybe we'll production meeting in the middle of the show. Maybe I'll bother somebody from the Adelphi team. Joe did an amazing job when he was on. He gave out, not only did he give out horses, sometimes it's great to have somebody like Joe on, from more of the horseman side, because they look at it so differently than handicappers. He was coming up with horses, Nick, that you and I wouldn't, that were paying good prices. And that if you can put that sort of handicapping acumen together with some of those horseman angles, you can really have something. I guess that's one of the things you've been talking about, speaking of Adelphi, in the show you did this year, and folks can go back and listen because they're evergreen. The show you did about the edge you can get looking at things from a little bit more of a horseman side of things.
Yeah, you really can. I mean, it's interesting to take on as many perspectives as possible. And, those of us that are hungry for data and info, we're going to look wherever we can and try and get anything that we might be able to glean from it to use moving forward.
The Backstretch Edge, the name of those shows. If you go to inthemoneypodcast.com, you can check that out. By the way, some folks are watching on the In the Money Media YouTube channel. That's great. We're happy to have you here. Please subscribe while you're here. Also, let us know what you think in the comments. Maybe let us know who you thought the most impressive performance of the week was. That's one good way to get in touch. If you're listening on the audio side, speaking of sales, going to have a little preview of the Tattersall sale coming up with Jimmy George. That'll be audio only. Very much worth a listen to here. So you want to talk about some interesting pedigrees and horses you remember, Nick. Peeking through that catalog, you'll see some Breeders' Cup pedigrees in there. All right, before we get down to the business of recapping, I just wanted to ask you more generally, experientially, how you did it at Colonial Downs. What was the vibe like? How were those days of racing as a fan?
Yeah, I enjoyed it thoroughly. Spent Friday morning on the backstretch and went and saw a number of the stakes horses. Spent some time with Alice Haynes, who had Cairo out grazing, and he's like a puppy dog, so he was really easy to be around. She was very, very nice. I did an interview with Ben Curtis, who rode Cairo as a leading rider at Colonial Downs. We went around and spent some time in Saffie Joseph Jr.'s barn and saw Be Your Best. Got to see Reeve McGahee, who was there with Fort Washington and Integration. And then we went trackside and watched Mystic Dan gallop on the turf. And I did about a minute and a half or 2 minutes with Leif Dickinson, who's the track superintendent at Colonial. Talked to him a little bit about his experience with the weather on the eastern half of the United States. He's a guy who was in California for years and was a track super at Del Mar, which I joked with him must be the easiest job in the world. And so he, of course, we shared a laugh about that. But it was interesting. It was fun. It's a great little track. The Virginia thoroughbred community is outstanding. Obviously, Virginia is more meaningful in thoroughbred racing, I think, than people realize. And the commission and the HBPA are very pro racing, which coming from a place like Texas, where the commission is a complete and utter disaster, it's a welcome shift, and it was nice to see that. So it was great. I'm glad the place reopened. Obviously, now that it's under the ownership of Churchill Downs, there's a lot of coordination amongst the folks at Twin Spires and CDI to really help it flourish. So I think there's a lot to look forward to with Colonial for sure. And if if you're in the Mid-Atlantic, you're within a drive away, get there, because it's great sight lines in the facility, a lot of comfortable seating. I'll tell you, if you're somebody that likes hospitality type seating, effectively the whole grandstand is, right? It's either boxes or a restaurant or another restaurant or suites. So definitely built for the modern audience, not so much the rows and rows of theater stadium style seats that you'd get at a place like Saratoga or the old Belmont. So yeah, I would strongly recommend going. You're definitely going to find some of the best grass racing around.
Nick mentions about the history in Virginia. We do have a lot of new people around here. The older listeners are going to be like, "Of course, why are you even saying this out loud?"
Right.
But yeah. A little horse called Secretariat was a Virginia bred, though a Kentucky breeding person did tell me when I mentioned that at some point, well, yeah, but he got out of there as fast as he could.
Right, of course.
They're all going to be competitive about this stuff. But yeah, I really enjoyed our coverage. We had Michael Domable and Will Humphrey. They just did such a great job going through the card with us. We're so lucky here to have such a deep team. Of course, Nick being a key member of it. I wasn't planning on this. I'm gonna, and it's gonna mean I have to click around a little bit to get to a screen that I'm not on. But let's talk about the big races at Arlington. And you mentioned getting a chance to clap eyes on Fort Washington, who won the Arlington Million with a 99 Beyer speed figure. I had a really fun experience watching this race. I was back at the house. I was doing a charity dinner. I was cooking and doing a little whiskey tasting for our friends at Therapeutic Horses of Saratoga, and their board member, Ramon Dominguez, was among the guests. So I got to watch that race with Ramon. And it was, I think I'm a pretty decent race watcher. And then you see the kind of observations he makes during the race. I mean, they are turning in. It looks to me like Integration has every shot in the world. And he's just like, as if he was reading from tomorrow's paper, Junior's loaded. He's gonna win on Fort Washington. And I was like, I mean, yeah, he's got a chance, as certain as anything in the world. And of course, it proved to be exactly right. It was like, can I just borrow your brain for a little bit and go to the UK and do some in-running wagering, please? But Fort Washington, very, very good. Got his day in the sun. How was the setup for him? Was he partially a beneficiary of a setup? Did he do this 100% on the square? What was your take on this effort and how seriously we need to take it?
Yeah, I mean, looking at the clock, I don't think he got a particularly big setup. The pace did come apart a little bit, but the horse setting the pace was a 55-1 shot. So
right,
it's not all that surprising, right, that it came apart as much as it did. And I asked John Velasquez afterwards. I guess we'll talk about Integration in a minute. As far as Fort Washington goes, the barn apparently had really liked Fort Washington's training leading up to the race. And Junior rode this horse with a tremendous amount of confidence. This is now his third graded stake win on him in 2025. A horse that had kind of knocked at the door, but couldn't really fire that kill shot in a big race to get it done. And now he's done it on multiple occasions. Really take away the one sort of poor effort in the Wise Dan at Churchill, and he's had a really nice run over the course of the last 6 months or so. And I thought Junior just had a ton of confidence, kept him at the back, didn't worry about moving too soon. Tyler Gaffalione gave Grant Sonata a great ride to save all kinds of ground, come through along the inside, and Junior got them basically right before the wire. So Fort Washington is an interesting middle distance horse. And I think there was legitimately some concern about whether he wanted to go the full mile and an eighth. And he answered those, or I'm sorry, the full mile and a quarter. He answered those questions very, very simply in doing so. So, the problem with both him and a horse like Integration is that they probably don't have the turn of foot to be milers, and they don't have the stamina to be mile and a half horses. So they're in this sort of tough spot as far as turf racing goes. And the Arlington Million was probably the last grade one opportunity for them that really suits them distance-wise. So, I'd imagine Sugar will look for races like the Knickerbocker. I would imagine he'll try one of them in the Coolmore Turf Mile, because you kind of have to at this point and hope that maybe there's some wild pace in front of you and you can kick on enough. Fort Washington feels like probably the more likely of those two. Integration, this was a golden opportunity for a grade one, Pete. And he's been there and he's come up short on a number of occasions. And it's just getting to the point where you kind of feel like it's never going to happen. And I did think that there's maybe a little bit of an argument that Johnny was a little too aggressive with him early, maybe had him a little too close, asked him to elongate that move a little bit more than he's really capable of doing. But, if you had told me that's where he was going to be at the quarter pole in that scenario, we would have all taken it. Yes. Right. So he was a little underwhelming on the day and probably feels like a horse that has ultimately made it clear he's just a grade 2 type.
Yeah, may well be. I mean, you could find the right opportunity if you get lucky, but this was about as good as it gets. Another one, just from a handicapping point of view. Now, this angle isn't an angle that you bet automatically, but whenever it comes up as obviously as this, I do like to point it out. When you've got the 3 to 5 versus the 11 to 2 shot, you can come back to the old why enter 2 when 1 would do. It makes sense, at least for your verticals, to be keying around that second horse. It's nothing like automatic, but it is something that I do tend to pay attention to. Obviously, there's other reasons, politics, etc., why you would do it. It doesn't necessarily show a lack of confidence in one or an overweening confidence in the other, but it is something I don't mind paying attention to at all. Well, let's keep things with the racing at Colonial for a moment and talk about the Beverly D, which was won by Charlene's Dream with a 95 Beyer speed figure. What did you think of this effort and this race overall?
She was very gritty. I did not think that she'd be able to wire that field, stave off Be Your Best and all the closers. But, it was one of those where I think with Spanish Eyes, the runner-up, it's not as much of a worry, but Luis Saez let Beach Bum fall way too far behind in that race. And if she is closer and forcing the issue a little bit more, then that's another challenge that Charlene's Dream has to face earlier and might affect how much she has left in the tank down the stretch. So, but she was very determined. Be Your Best is a horse that, I thought she was a little bit of a phony going in. She was a grade 1 winner, but she did it out west on an easy lead. And, those turf horses, we'll touch on it a little bit later, talking about the Yellow Ribbon. They're just not, there are no grade 1 caliber turf females out there. So she was a little dressed up coming in, played out that way, really beaten on the square. But Charlene's Dream, the Texas bred, getting it done on the front end with Javier Castellano, who had a couple of wins on the card and picked up his first Saratoga win on Friday. I joked with him about it in the paddock and said he had to come leave town to really get it going, and he enjoyed that. So we laughed about the big win on AI on Friday as well. So, but it was a nice performance for Charlene's Dream, and we'll talk a little bit more about this obviously after we touch on the Secretariat. But this was a race where she got the job done, and that ultimately was what was necessary. I would take Spanish Eyes out of it. Brendan Walsh's Irish bred, who made her third start in North America, but seems to be clearly getting better with each passing one.
I love this ride by Javi, actually. On paper, I thought Be Your Best was going to be able to seize that advantage. Do you think Tyler made a mistake by not trying harder for the lead, or was this just a good ride by Castellano?
I think it was one of those with Tyler. He did what worked with her in the past, and it just didn't work this time. So I don't think he did anything wrong. I think she was on the lead last time by default. I think she's more of a horse that they've liked to target. But there is sort of this obsession among modern horsemen that their horses are, they're better with a target. They're better when they're sitting off it, so on and so forth. No, horses with speed are at their best when they're on the lead, period.
Yeah.
But I don't think Tyler did anything wrong. I think he put her where he thought she could be successful. And ultimately, Charlene's Dream just sort of repelled her from upper stretch home.
Yeah, there are examples where I do believe that's true, but I think it's one of those things that can be overused, especially if you're, and it depends on your categorization of a horse. If you're a speed horse and speed is your weapon, you are not better served by going absurdly slow or having a target. What you want to do is run efficiently and aggressively, but not to a fault. So yeah, I'm with you on that.
It's the same conversation we had last week about the test, right? And I brought up that Richard Migliori has always said it's not about how fast you're going; it's how you're going fast. And in this case, this race they weren't really going all that fast, but they were going fast in a very efficient way for two speed horses, in that they were isolated. And Javier really backed down the second quarter. It was 24, and I want to say about 24 and 2, which was a good type of fraction to be able to keep them going. And people forget Javier's been around a long time. He's an excellent front end rider.
Yeah.
And I think people that are really were expecting his demise to be here, they're disappointed at this point.
Well, yeah, we might have to talk about that AI race at some point, just because it was among the crazier things I've ever seen. And I also am tempted to go on a rabbit hole about the test, because there was some interesting data to come out that the racing flow figures, obviously identified that the pace wasn't overly fast, but interestingly had that test day track as a big closer favoring track, rising to the level of a bias in favor of off the pace horses. Now, you can always argue, was it the horses that make the numbers look like a bias, or was it a bias that made the closers do well? Anyway, that's a day that we're going to have our work to do, Nick, when those horses start running back to figure out what it was. My default position is the same now as it was then. Probably going to be a little leery of backing horses coming out of the test, but there is maybe an argument to be made that there were other things at play in that race. But let's save that, because we got too much to do here. We don't have all the time in the world. Let's talk about Giacoso, a horse I've always been a big fan of, but I wasn't smart enough to be a fan of on Saturday. Wins the Secretariat with a fairly modest 84 Beyer speed figure, but gets the job done and becomes a Grade 2 winner in the process.
Yeah, great ride by Ben Curtis, leading jockey at Colonial Downs, saved all the ground, burst him through on the inside. This is a horse that had gone wide in the American turf. I think speaks to the quality of that American turf. Amongst the 3-year-olds that were in there, you've got Test Score come back and win a Grade 1, and Zulu Kingdom, of course, won the Grade 1 that day, has come back and won twice, one of which he was disqualified from. But it was a good race, and the big move that Giacoso made around the outside was not ever going to really work, and he saved all kinds of ground in here. So really astute ride and a nice finish, and a race where a lot of the big players made wide outside moves. This race was run at the 0 setting, so effectively on what you could call the inner turf, and I think losing a little bit of ground there was a bit problematic. And I didn't love that Javier was as patient on Dream On as he was. I think Dream On is a horse that can be a little bit more involved early. I think that would have ultimately helped his chances quite a bit.
Let's move out west to talk about the Grade 1 Yellow Ribbon. Is it a Grade 1 or is it a Grade 2? Did I make that up? I upgraded the race accidentally.
It was a Grade 1 at some point.
Yeah, but I think that was going on a few years ago now. Yeah. As soon as I said it, I knew it was wrong. Heredia gets the job done with an 87 Beyer speed figure. But this is one that it's like every handicapping angle I talk about ad nauseum on the podcast, okay? East Coast horses shipping west. The general idea that the further west you ship, the better you do as a turf horse. This one having started off with some creditable form over in England. I mean, third in the Sun Chariot, which is a huge race, and then coming close in the East, winning out here, but also just looking at the running lines and some of the time form US angles we talk about all the time. That De La Rose run, sort of a classic, trying to close, making a move into blue fractions, and then even the Bogey run, making that early move into red fractions, getting there a little too soon, and then not quite being able to see it out. There were just I think a lot of educational things about Heredia. Didn't do you all that much good at the windows, in that we're talking about a horse that was an 8-5 shot in the end, but I do think we should at least touch on Heredia out there. What are your takeaways from this race?
I think the biggest takeaway for me is that Juan Hernandez just caught them all napping. He put this filly right on the lead. She had shown little to no speed in 2 prior starts in the eastern half of the United States, but ran very, very well in here on the front end. And, it was one rider leaving with intent, and it worked out. And it's amazing how often that happens, as she was able to get out and dictate terms to everybody else. There was no question that coming into this, she had taken on the best competition of anybody in the field, at least of late. You mentioned that De La Rose, it was won by Deep Satin, and she came back and finished second in the Boston Spa. The Bogey was won by Dynamic Pricing. She came back and won the Just a Game. So Heredia had been facing some good horses. This was a clever move by Graham Motion as well. So It was the only bad decision Graham made on Saturday was going to Colonial, because he won grade 2 races at Saratoga and Delmar. And I joked with him when I had him on live for Twin Spires. I said, if you're here, it feels like a good sign for Beach Bomb. And he kind of played it coy. And she underperformed, but he expected a big run from her. And then here he won both the Yellow Ribbon and the Saratoga Oaks by open lengths.
Let's talk about Saratoga. Should we do the Oaks first?
Sure.
All right, so we have the Saratoga Oaks, and that was won by Laurelin, as you mentioned. Graham Motion trained, beautiful trip and ride, career best 93 by her speed figure for this daughter of Zarak. Cool pedigree and a nice win, and another big win for Kendrick Carmouche.
Yeah, nice win for Kendrick. Kendrick with a positive ROI at the meet. He's ridden extremely well the whole time, and it's great to see because he's just such a likable guy. A great ride here. This is a typical Kendrick is really good when he's riding horses that he believes in, and you can tell he's just a passenger at that point. He is very comfortable, and this is a filly that just kind of moves whenever she wants, whenever the rider gives her the cue, goes on with it, and is a horse with a lot of talent. So we talked about this a little bit when you and I handicapped it, and I felt like the figure in the Penn Oaks should have been higher, and it's now abundantly clear that it should have been higher. It should be more like an 88 or an 89, and then this 93 wouldn't really stick out so much. Now, you can argue that a daughter of Zarak out of a Cape Cross mare got better with more distance, and in all likelihood, she should get even better with more distance. So it sets up a really intriguing scenario for a race like the QE2 in October at Keeneland, because Laurelin obviously will be there. It'll just be a question of if Graham uses a race in the interim. But what will happen with Nitrogen trying dirt now going back to turf? And did Nitrogen get exposed a little bit, getting beaten by Fion, which the form for that race didn't really come back all that great. Opulent Restraint kind of went pretty tamely in here, finished a distant third. So, I don't know exactly what to make of it. But what I do know is that Laurelin, to me, is the best distance filly that we've seen at the meet on turf, and that does include Nitrogen.
All right, that's high praise for sure. Yeah, we'll see what Nitrogen has in the Alabama. The early betting in the Alabama surprised me a little bit that I was noticing, Nick, as I was writing my horse-by-horse write-up this morning for attheraces.com, where Good Cheer was still odds on to Lacara's 7-2. I'm thinking Lacara isn't supposed to be 7-2 in that race. Doesn't she have? I know she was with the grain of the racetrack the last time, but I don't even know if you've looked at the race yet. But just on your gut feel, isn't she supposed to have a pace advantage again?
I mean, she's about as loose as a horse could be on paper. It looks as if she could be 4 in front and going 48 and change in here. So yeah, it's a really good scenario for her. And yes, she was with the track last out. The problem with Good Cheer is, that was bad. Like, wet track or not, she ran poorly.
Yeah,
and you need a much better effort from her in order to win this. So it does have to make you a little concerned.
That early betting might just be that early betting, and whoever the early compiler isn't paying attention to just trying to pretend that last race from Good Cheer didn't happen, which, I don't think is the right approach necessarily. But anyway, we'll talk about that race.
I'll tell you, the only other thing I'll say about the Alabama, the biggest loser from this Alabama, and I like him, and he's having a really good meet, and I shouldn't question trainer's judgment. This is a big mistake by Jorge Abreu not running Scottish Lassie in here.
Yeah.
He could have almost locked up the Eclipse, and he's going to go run in the Cotillion. I have nothing nice to say about Park, so I'm not going to say anything more. Or those races, he should have run his horse in here. The 1.25 miles should not have been a concern. You could have locked up the Eclipse winning this race.
I assume that's what I'm just going to take a wild guess that he just assumes she wants no part of it.
And the way it shaped up on paper, right? You think the 1.25 miles would have been a problem?
You might not really need to run a proper 1.25 miles. I don't know how much of a Tesla car is going to make it. It's hard, but it's hard to know when you have a talented runner like that. If she could make it a bit of a test, or if they're worried about her getting the 1.25 miles, it could be a glorified 1.1 1/8.
That's fair.
It's a fascinating race. It's going to be interesting to see it. It would have been more fun if Scottish Lassie were in here. There's no doubt about that. All right, we got to talk Sword Dancer. This one was won by El Cordobas, 4-1. I was worried this horse would be bet off the boards based on the Appleby factor, but I guess you had 2 Applebys to choose from, so maybe that was part of why the market was what it was for this one. This figure came back pretty strong on Bayer, a 104 for this one. So that makes this a race to definitely be paying attention to going forward. Let's start by talking about El Cordobas. Hadn't won a race in no, he'd been okay. I'm thinking of another horse.
He came in off a win.
Yeah, exactly. I was conflating my Applebee's with the horse that ran in Virginia. How good is this horse going forward? Is this a Breeders' Cup player?
Feels like it. I know Charlie said after the race in Germany yesterday that Rebels Romance is going to go to the Canadian International and then bid for, I believe it would be an unprecedented 3rd Breeders' Cup turf. I don't think anybody's won 3. And of course, there was a year where he didn't run in it, but he would, if he wins this year, he will have won in 22, 24, and 25. But El Cordobas ran very well. Had the white Godolphin cap too, so he wasn't really the more fancied of the pair. At least that's what it is in theory. And you and I touched on this when we handicapped the races for the podcast, was that Nation's Pride has so much name recognition in this country that he was always going to be overbet. And to his credit, he ran fine. He ran actually quite well. But El Cordobas got a great ride by Flavian Pratt, saved ground where he needed to, came from the back. The story of the race, at least to me, Pete, is the poor performance of Far Bridge. And I do finally feel some level of validation for bringing up over and over, this is a quirky horse who needs his trip, and don't get totally seduced by all those big wins over. I mean, he was beating horses like Padiddle, for crying out loud, in the Man of War. And, he had a really soft trip in the Bowling Green. And, when he doesn't have that coveted rail run, it's just not going to work out for him. And I would imagine if they resurface in the Hirsch, they're probably going to look to go back to some of the tactics they used last year, late in the year, when he was a lot more aggressively ridden. The problem is he has no chance whatsoever in the Breeders' Cup turf if he is aggressively ridden. He will not go forward and beat out all of – if there's a West Coast turf horse that stretches out, even if he ends up on the lead, he will not hold off that Appleby Armada in the final half mile. So I do think they need to come to the realization that Farbridge has had a phenomenal career. He's been a deserving multiple Grade 1 winner, but we've likely seen the best of him.
There's Grade 1s, there's Grade 1 horses, there's Grade 1 plus horses. You pretty much have to be a Grade 1 plus horse to win at the Breeders' Cup.
In this country, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So, right.
On turf. Right, on turf. Yeah.
But it does seem like that's a bridge too far. But he's such a cool horse. But I did think you made a key point. I mean, you made it before the race, so this isn't just after timing. But you did say this. You were concerned about the draw. And then, I don't know. I haven't watched the head-on enough to say if those bumps affected him early. I take it you don't think the bumps at the start were much excuse about everything that happened after.
No, I mean, and this rash of DQs we've had in different places in with incidents that happened in the first half or first stride of a race. It blows my mind what people sometimes think could matter that happens early on. I mean, a couple bumps early in a 12 furlong race. I mean, a bump at the quarter pole, bump at the 8th pole, something like that, totally different ballgame.
You will see the occasion where they get the wind knocked out of them, and they just don't run. But and you can usually tell when it rises to that level.
Because they drop out right away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. But I think that I mean, look, I think your theory was the correct theory of the case, but I could see somebody saying, what about the bump at the start? So I figured I would bring it up. Let's talk about that wacky AI race, just because I heard so many people, it was the talk of the racetrack, and everybody said the same thing. Have you ever seen anything like that? I'm not sure if I've ever seen a race just like that one. If you didn't see it, this is a replay well worth watching. How would you describe the trip? I'm curious if it matches my memory of it.
Yeah, I mean, it was a nightmare. Bad start, spotted a lot of ground, looked hopeless, had so much run that Javier kind of had to go to the inside. I mean, I hate to be the cold water guy, but I mean, the race got like, I think, a 61 fig. So It's not, it was the ultimate blow up pace collapse that probably helped that he was coming from off. It obviously didn't help to get hit at the gate so much and lose so much ground, but fun race because, I mean, one of the most exciting things when you're sitting there is watching a deep closer pick everybody up from the back of the pack. And that was exactly what happened. So I wouldn't exactly be planning on seeing him in the hopeful, but he could be a fun horse, and obviously is probably an above average restricted. I think it was a maiden auction race. So it's an above average maiden auction horse for sure.
Yeah, one that will almost definitely be overbet, but a fun watch of the replay on AI if you hadn't seen it. We could speed round anything else you have on your mind from anywhere, but especially Saratoga. There were some other stakes. Anybody stand out or any maidens you feel like we should be putting on our horses to watch list, etc.?
Yeah, there was a really good 2-year-old first timer win long on the turf for Chad Brown on Friday named Deep Learning, who I would think is likely to be next seen in the Miss Grillo. And then I would say, one of the things about a West Coast Breeders' Cup is that we usually get the biggest shot from Ballydoyle because they know they're getting firm turf. But she feels like a horse that's probably Breeders' Cup worthy, and I believe got an 84 buyer speed figure, which would likely put her in the conversation up there with the same color bearer newspaper of record from 7 years ago.
The 3-year-olds are running an 86, right? I mean,
Chicoso got an 84, right? So what we were just talking about. So she won this race by open lengths, just really unleashed a huge late kick. And we've seen these connections, of course, do extremely well with horses that were purchased overseas. And I'm just looking it up. I know I'm typing in the middle of it, but she was one that had been taken at she was actually an OBS horse, OBS April for $325,000. So I'll be real excited to see where she shows up next.
That's interesting. I wonder what the sales history of that one is.
And Gargan's colt on the dirt, Golden Tornado on Saturday looked good as well. I don't remember what fig he got off the top of my head, but I think it was solid.
Yeah, I'll dig on that. That one, the half to Verifier, who has already run some really nice figures in the 90s. So one that was very much on the radar. We did a baby talk show for our friends at Keeneland Sales last week. We're going to be doing that throughout the summer, and then again during Keeneland, just trying to keep up on what's going on. It was an 86 for Golden Tornado.
Very solid. I was just looking good. Yeah.
Rock solid there, going the 6 furlongs and not bet off the boards there either. 380 if folks were tuned in to what Dean and I were talking about. The Amos runner Oscar's Hope attracted a whole lot of betting attention there. Fastest horse in the world type buzz almost for that one off those big workouts. The way that the Amos runners improve second time out feels like one that's going to be bet off the board next time too.
It does.
Yeah, horse by those odds.
Horse that had mainly trained at Churchill too, which is why it was surprising that he took the money that he did. But he did have one local workout and apparently looked good in doing so. But the workout report had good things to say about Golden Tornado. He was coming in off of B+ work also, and we've seen now Danny do really well with first time starters.
That is really interesting. That there's sometimes, and I guess it happens in baseball with prospects too. You get such a buzz on one that someone else with buzz can still represent value. It's definitely an interesting thing to pay attention to, and one of the reasons why I like these maiden races. And I think there's a lot of people are very cynical about them. Oh, there are benefits for insiders, but a lot of this information is widely available, and a lot of the supposed inside buzz leads horses to being hellaciously overbet. I always think these are fascinating contests and wish that people in the handicapping contest world weren't anti them the way they seem to be.
Yeah, well, I think there's a subset of people who are, but I mean, I think they're useful when you use them the right way.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. Any closing thoughts from you, Nick, before we send home this segment of the show if you're listening, or this episode if you're watching?
Yeah, I mean, look, it was fun to be a Colonial and see these races. I'm glad they've continued on. I think it's important to remind everyone and to remember that these races in their best form at Arlington were very heavy on European participation. And I think in order to really try and get back to some of the caliber of those races, there's going to have to be increased European participation. Now, it's obviously much, much harder to get to New Kent, Virginia than it is Chicago, Illinois. It goes without saying. So my hope is that, now that the races have found a firm footing, before there starts to be a little bit more grade creep the wrong direction, especially for the big race itself, I'm hopeful that they're able to get a little bit better plan together of getting some horses in it and getting it to the right time of year, because we've got a glut of turf racing right now, both for 3-year-olds and for some of the older females. In an 8-day period, we're going to have run the Boston Spa, the Beverly D, and the EP Taylor. And, let's be realistic, Pete, there are not enough top-level horses to fill those races. Yeah. So it makes for a very, very difficult scenario. So I'm hoping for perhaps a bit of a long shot, but for a bit more coordination to go on.
Coordination and a re-examination of the timing of the schedule. We can dream, Nick. We can dream. And as for that European participation, that reminds me, I actually want to see if there's any way I can help with trying to put connections together in different parts of the world. It's one of the things I have is a pretty good Rolodex. So we'll see. Go. We'll see if we can get on that. I talked to our friends over at the IRB as far as that goes. One last little plug. I want to let people know that the ITM Horse Players Tour continues apace. This is your best way to win a $10,000 BCBC seat at no additional cost if you just play in a $20 feeder on Fridays. Horseplayers.com is the place to check it out. Get involved. The lineup will be announced soon. Nick, thanks so much.
Thank you, my friend. Talk to you soon.